Hello everybody and welcome to this video. It's the continued translation of Much Ado About Nothing into modern English, and everything that I say in today's video is contained in Mr. Bruff's Guide to Much Ado About Nothing, £3.99 at mrbruff.com. So we're continuing our translation of the scene. It's at the dance and everybody leaves except for Don John, Borachio and Claudio. And Don John says, "Sure my brother is amorous on Hero, and hath withdrawn her father to break with him about it. The ladies follow her, and but one visor remains." So what's being said here, my brother, and he's talking about his half-brother, Don Pedro, is keen on Hero, and he's taken her dad aside to let him know his intentions. And the ladies have gone off with Hero, but there's one masked person left. And Borachio says, "And that is Claudio. I know him by his bearing." So in other words, that's Claudio. I recognize him by the way he sort of carries himself. Don John then says to Claudio, "Are you not Signor Benedict?" So this is an example of the dramatic irony where we know Don John knows that this is Claudio, but he's pretending that he thinks he's Benedict. Are you Benedict? And Claudio, for whatever reason, plays along. "You know me well, I am he." In other words, yeah, I am Benedict. And Don John says, "Signor, you are very near my brother in his love. He is enamoured on Hero. I pray you dissuade him from her. She is no equal for his birth. You may do the part of an honest man in it." In other words, and this is all a sort of elaborate trick. In other words, what he's saying is, look, my brother Don Pedro is very fond of you, and he's in love with Hero. Please make him change his mind. She's too low-born to marry a prince, and you'd be doing the right thing. So it's all this elaborate trick. And Claudio says, "How know you he loves her?" So how do you know he loves her? And Don John says, "I heard him swear his affection." So in other words, I heard him say that he loves her. And Borachio says, "So did I too, and he swore he would marry her tonight." And Don John says, "Come, let us go to the banquet," and off they go. So Claudio is left. And he says, "Thus answer I in the name of Benedict, but hear these ill news with the ears of Claudio. 'Tis certain so, the prince woos for himself. Friendship is constant in all other things, save in the office and affairs of love. Therefore all hearts in love use their own tongues. Let every eye negotiate for itself, and trust no agent. For beauty is a witch, against whose charms faith melteth into blood. This is an accident of hourly proof, which I mistrusted not. Farewell, therefore, Hero." And then Claudio takes off his mask and says this, which really means, though I answered in Benedict's name, I heard this bad news with the ears of Claudio. So that's the prince's game. He's courting Hero for himself, not for me. You can rely on friends in everything except when it comes to love. Lovers should always do their own courting. They should always get their own boyfriends and girlfriends. They shouldn't rely on somebody else. Promises count for nothing when one is bewitched by beauty. It happens all the time, and I should have expected it. So goodbye, Hero. And then Benedict comes back in. "Count Claudio? Yea, the same. Come, will you go with me? Whither?" So he's sort of saying, "Count Claudio, yes, that's me. Will you come with me? Where to?" Now Benedict says, "Even to the next willow about your own business county. What fashion will you wear the garland of? About your neck like a usurer's chain, or under your arm like a lieutenant's scarf? You must wear it one way, for the prince hath got your Hero." Now this is obviously a clever way of saying the prince has got Hero for you, but the way he words it, "the prince has got your Hero," is not good when we know what Claudio now believes. It sounds like Don Pedro's got her for himself. So what's Benedict really saying here? Well, a willow stands for unrequited love. So that's the place you need to go. How will you wear that garland you make? How about round your neck like a moneylender's chain, or maybe like a lieutenant's sash? But wear it you must, because the prince has got your Hero. And Claudio says, "I wish him joy of her." In other words, well, I hope he's very happy with her. But Benedict sees something is not right here and says, "Why, that's spoken like an honest driver. So they settle bullocks. But did you think the prince would have served you thus?" In other words, You sound like a cattle dealer, as if you were just selling a cow. Do you think the prince would have behaved that way towards you? Claudio says, I pray you leave me. So all of this wordplay from Benedict, which of course mirrors the wordplay from Beatrice that we've seen previously, is too much for Claudio. He doesn't want to talk in riddles and metaphors. He just sort of says, look, please leave me alone. And Benedict says, ho, now you strike like the blind man. 'Twas the boy that stole your meat, and you'll beat the post. Again, clever wordplay, but what's being said is, you're behaving as if you are a blind man hitting a wooden post instead of the boy who stole your meat. Claudio says, if it will not be, I'll leave you. So if you're not going to leave me, I'll leave you. And off he goes. And Benedict says, alas, poor hurt fowl. Now will he creep into sedges, but that my lady Beatrice should know me and not know me. The prince's fool? Ha! It may be I go under that title because I am merry. Yea, but so I am apt to do myself wrong. I am not so reputed. It is the base, though bitter disposition of Beatrice that puts the world into her person, and so gives me out. Well, I'll be revenged as I may. So a little glimpse into the character of Benedict here. He senses something's not quite right with Claudio, but he completely, forgets that and thinks about his own situation, basically saying, that Claudio's like a poor, wounded bird creeping into the rough grass to hide. And then he changes onto himself. It's strange that Lady Beatrice should seem to know who I was, yet not know who I was. She called me the prince's fool. Maybe I'm called that because I'm so fun-loving, but I'm not being fair on myself. That's not the way people see me. It's Beatrice's mean, sarcastic nature that makes her think she speaks for everyone in what she says about me. Well, I'll get my revenge one way or another. And then Don Pedro comes back. Now, Signor, where's the Count? Did you see him? In other words, where's Claudio? Have you seen him? And Benedict says, Troth, my lord, I have played the part of Lady Fame. I found him here as melancholy as a lodge in a warren. I told him, and I think I told him true, that your grace had got the goodwill of this young lady, and I offered him my company to a willow tree, either to make him a garland, as being forsaken, or to bind him up a rod, as being worthy to be whipped. So in other words, yes, I did find him. I played the part of the gossip. I found him here looking sad and lonely, so I told him, and I think I told him the truth, that you had won Hero's affections. So I offered to accompany him to a willow tree, where he could either make himself a garland to show he's been rejected, or a bundle of sticks to be whipped with. And Don Pedro says, to be whipped? What's his fault? What has he done wrong that deserves whipping? And Benedict says, the flat transgression of a schoolboy, who, being overjoyed with finding a bird's nest, shows it to his companion, and he steals it. So Benedict's saying, well, it's the crime of a schoolboy. It's a childish crime of a young boy who's so excited about finding a bird's nest that he shows it to his friend, and his friend takes it. Don Pedro says, wilt thou make a trust a transgression? The transgression is in the stealer. In other words, why are you calling trusting your friend a crime? The criminal is the one who stole the nest. And Benedict says, yes, yet it had not been amiss. The rod had been made, and the garland too. For the garland he might have worn himself, and the rod he might have bestowed on you, who, as I take it, have stolen his bird's nest. So he's saying, well, it wouldn't have been a bad idea to make the rod and the garland. It would still be appropriate to wear the garland, and the rod he might have used on you, who, I believe, has stolen his bird's nest. Don Pedro says, I will but teach them to sing and restore them to the owner. In other words, well, all I want to do is teach the baby birds to sing, and then I'll return the nest back to its rightful owner. This elaborate extended metaphor that we see throughout now of this kind of fallen bird. And Benedict says, well, if they're singing answer you're saying, by my faith, you say honestly. In other words, if the song they sing is the one you say it is, that Hero is keen on Claudio, then we'll know you're telling the truth. And Don Pedro says, the Lady Beatrice hath a quarrel to you. The gentleman that danced with her told her she is much wronged by you. This is hilarious. So in other words, Beatrice is angry with you. The gentleman she danced with told her that you've done her wrong. And then Benedict goes into this huge angry outburst. Oh, she misused me past the endurance of a block. An oak but with one green leaf on it would have answered her. My very visor began to assume life and scold with her. She told me, not thinking I had been myself, that I was the prince's jester, that I was duller than a great Thor, huddling jest upon jest with such impossible conveyance upon me that I stood like a man at a mark, with a whole army shooting at me. She speaks poniards, and every word stabs. If her breath were as terrible as her terminations, there would be no one living near her. She would infect to the North Star. I would not marry her, though she were endowed with all that Adam bad left him before he transgressed. She would have made Hercules have turned spit, yea, and have clept his club to make the fire too. Come, talk not of her. You shall find her the infernal eight in good apparel. I would to God some scholar would conjure her, for certainly while she is here a man may live as quiet in hell as in this sanctuary, and people sin upon purpose because they go thither. So indeed all disquiet, horror, and perturbation follows her. So this huge outburst where he's saying, not even a block of wood could put up with the way she abused me. An oak tree with only the smallest sign of life would have fought back. Even my mask seemed about to come to life and tell her what's what. She told me, not realizing it was me she was talking to, that I was the prince's court jester, that I was more boring than a wet weekend. She piled joke on joke at my expense so quickly that it was like having a whole army shooting at me. She speaks daggers, and every word stabs. If her breath were as terrible as her words, nothing could survive between here and the North Star. I wouldn't marry her, even if she had inherited the whole of paradise. If she were married to Hercules, she'd have made him do the cooking, and even chop up his club for firewood. Please don't talk to me about her. She is 8, the goddess of mischief and ruin disguised in pretty clothes. I would to God some learned man would magic her away, because as long as she's about, there's no peace. People sin deliberately to go to hell because it's more peaceful than being where she is. Chaos, dismay, and trouble follow her wherever she goes. And just at that moment, Don Pedro says, look, here she comes. Look, she's coming. So I'm going to continue the translation in the next video.